A breakthrough for scientists after they had a 20-minute conversation with a...
Is AI taking us as a species, as a civilization? It doesn't, of course, prove representational language, but it certainly, for me, what's crazy is that the dolphins, can understand that very abstract topic and remember everything they've done before.
The ocean was calm when the breakthrough happened, though the weight of the moment was anything but. For decades, marine biologists, linguists, and computational scientists had labored to unravel the intricate patterns of dolphin communication. They had cataloged the whistles, clicks, burst pulses, and body language, building libraries of sound that seemed endlessly complex. But now, for the first time in human history, those patterns had been cracked wide open, not just recognized as signals, but translated into structured meaning. The world learned that we had not merely been eavesdropping on noise. We had been listening to a civilization speaking in a language as rich and nuanced as our own. Before we start, smash the like and subscribe buttons for more updates. The project that achieved this feat was a fusion of disciplines rarely seen. Advances in AI-driven pattern recognition met decades of acoustic field data, combined with a breakthrough in underwater recording technologies that could capture sounds with unprecedented fidelity. It was not simply a matter of feeding data into a machine and pressing translate. The system had to be taught the grammar, syntax, and contextual variations of dolphin speech, understanding not only the tones, but the sequencing, rhythm, and even the pauses between them. Unlike human language, dolphin communication integrates multiple layers of information simultaneously. A whistle can carry emotional tone, identity markers, spatial coordinates, and intent in the same breath. The first successful decoding did not yield a single word or phrase, but an entire conversation, captured between two wild bottlenose dolphins off the coast of the Bahamas. Researchers recognized individual identifiers embedded in the sound, much like names, followed by a series of complex patterns that, when run through the newly calibrated model, revealed a message about cooperative hunting. The dolphins were discussing the movement of fish schools, the positioning of their pod members, and even subtle environmental changes. This was not instinctive signaling. This was planned coordination, shared memory, and mutual strategy, hallmarks of advanced social intelligence. The implications were staggering. Humans had long suspected that dolphins possessed a level of self-awareness and cognitive sophistication rivaling the great apes. Now, evidence pointed toward a fully realized linguistic system, one capable of conveying past, present, and future events. The language had tenses, conditional structures, and what appeared to be metaphorical constructs. Some sequences suggested storytelling, narratives that referenced events beyond the immediate moment, possibly to teach younger members of the pod. This hinted at something that, until now, had been exclusively claimed by humanity: culture. The discovery also forced a radical reevaluation of the dolphin's place in the natural order. These creatures were no longer just highly intelligent animals. They were non-human persons in the fullest sense of the term, speaking a language not derived from human influence. That made their civilization entirely independent, shaped by millions of years of evolution in an alien environment. Where our societies are built on sight and the manipulation of objects, theirs are built on sound and the manipulation of social bonds across vast underwater spaces. Understanding this meant glimpsing an entirely different blueprint for what intelligence could look like. The sheer scale of the lexicon uncovered was daunting. Initial analysis suggested that the dolphin's vocabulary could number in the tens of thousands of unique patterns, far surpassing what was expected. But vocabulary was only part of the challenge. Their mode of communication was multidimensional. They often used overlapping signals, clicks layered with whistles combined with body postures and bubble emissions. These multiple channels could be processed in parallel by other dolphins, creating a density of meaning that left human speech feeling almost primitive by comparison. One signal could simultaneously convey a warning, identify the speaker, describe the location of danger, and instruct others on how to respond. While the research was still in its infancy, early dialogues suggested that dolphins had concepts for cooperation, negotiation, humor, and even play-based learning. In one recorded interaction, a younger dolphin used an unconventional whistle pattern to describe a fish that wasn't present, prompting laughter-like responses from others. The AI model tagged this as a form of jest, a deliberate bending of reality for social amusement. If confirmed, this would represent one of the most extraordinary parallels between dolphin society and our own, showing that playfulness and abstract thought are not uniquely human traits. The methodology that enabled this breakthrough was as revolutionary as the discovery itself. Scientists deployed swarms of autonomous underwater drones equipped with wideband hydrophones, capable of tracking individual dolphins in 3 dimensions. This allowed researchers to pair specific vocalizations with precise behaviors and environmental contexts. A whistle heard during a hunting maneuver could be linked to its outcome, creating a cause-and-effect map. Over millions of such correlations, the AI began to tease out meaning, not by relying on human-imposed categories, but by mapping the dolphin's own internal logic. As the database grew, so did the ability to engage. In carefully controlled trials, researchers began sending back simple, non-intrusive messages in dolphin language, such as acknowledgments or friendly greetings. The dolphins responded, sometimes with curiosity, sometimes with what seemed like mild amusement, as if realizing the humans were attempting to speak, but with the grammar of a toddler. These interactions, while limited, hinted at the possibility of genuine dialogue in the future, though ethical boundaries were hotly debated. The scientific community agreed on one point: this was not a toy or a stunt, it was a bridge between species and it demanded respect. The cultural ramifications rippled beyond the lab. Philosophers began wrestling with the idea of a parallel intelligent civilization coexisting with us on Earth, hidden in plain sight for millennia. Legal scholars revisited questions of rights and personhood, contemplating whether dolphins should be granted protections similar to those afforded to humans. Artists and storytellers found new inspiration in the idea of translating dolphin myths, if such things existed, into human language. Educators envisioned a future where school children might learn the basics of dolphin speech alongside human languages, building empathy and cross-species awareness from a young age. For the scientists at the center of the project, the moment of decoding was both exhilarating and humbling. They spoke of feeling as if they had stepped into a conversation that had been going on for millions of years, realizing that humans were not the first or only beings to develop complex societies and sophisticated language. There was a profound sense of smallness in that realization, but also a deep gratitude for being invited, however briefly, into the dolphins' world. The more the team listened, the more they realized that dolphin communication was inextricably tied to their environment. The ocean was not just a backdrop. It was part of the language itself. Echoes from the seafloor, the movement of currents, the presence of distant pods, all shaped the meaning of messages. This suggested that their worldview, or ocean view, as one researcher put it, was fundamentally different from ours, embedded in a three-dimensional soundscape that humans could barely comprehend. Learning their language meant not only decoding patterns, but expanding our own sensory imagination. There were still countless mysteries to unravel. Some vocal sequences appeared to reference locations far beyond the dolphin's current range, suggesting mental maps of the ocean that spanned hundreds of miles. Others hinted at awareness of seasonal cycles and the behavior of other species, including humans. A few cryptic exchanges, when translated, seemed to describe events from years past, raising the possibility of long-term historical memory. The researchers were cautious about overinterpreting these findings, but the implications were impossible to ignore. The dolphins might carry an oral history of their people, passed down through generations. The shock to the world was not just in learning that dolphins had a language, but in realizing how much of it had been happening right under our noses without our notice. Humanity had spent centuries studying the stars, sending probes to distant planets, and imagining contact with extraterrestrial intelligence, while an alien civilization had been swimming alongside us in the oceans all along. The revelation reframed not only our relationship with dolphins, but our understanding of what it means to share a planet with other sentient life. The Decoding project also underscored the fragility of what had been discovered. Dolphins live in ecosystems under increasing threat from climate change, pollution, and industrial activity. The possibility that we could now communicate with them added urgency to protecting their world, not as an act of charity toward wildlife, but as a matter of preserving another intelligent culture. The thought of losing their voices to human negligence was almost unbearable to those who had heard them speak. For now, the scientists continued their work, refining translations, mapping dialects between different pods, and uncovering subtler layers of meaning. Every new conversation revealed something unexpected: a novel whistle combination, an idiom unique to a particular group, a complex chain of messages exchanged over hours. It was as if the dolphins, aware of the growing comprehension, were testing the limits of what the humans could grasp, stretching their expressions into forms that challenged the translation algorithms. The sheer beauty of the sounds, once stripped of mystery but not of wonder, lingered with those who heard them. They were not merely functional signals. They were musical, with cadences and harmonies shaped by the fluid acoustics of the ocean. Some sequences resembled compositions with refrains and variations that felt deliberate and artful. Whether these were songs in the human sense or simply a byproduct of communication was still debated, but many who listened felt they were hearing both language and art intertwined. The event marked a turning point in science, but it also became a turning point in human self-perception. To speak with dolphins, even in halting phrases, was to step outside the boundaries of our own species and glimpse the possibilities of a broader conversation. One that had been ongoing without us and would likely continue long after we were gone. It was a reminder that intelligence takes many forms, that language can emerge in worlds vastly different from our own, and that we are not the sole authors of complexity and meaning on this planet. In the days and weeks after the breakthrough, the world's fascination showed no sign of waning. Researchers fielded questions from governments, educational institutions, and private citizens, all eager to understand what the dolphins might tell us next. And while the project's leaders were careful not to promise too much too soon, there was an unshakable sense that a door had been opened. A door not just into dolphin minds, but into a future where interspecies communication might be an ordinary fact of life. What had once been a dream confined to science fiction was now a living, breathing reality beneath the waves. Dolphins were no longer enigmatic companions of the sea. They were fellow conversationalists in the grand, ongoing dialogue of Earth. And with every exchange, every shared story, and every mutual acknowledgement, the gulf between our worlds grew smaller, carried on currents of sound through the vast and ancient ocean. The weeks after the decoding were a whirlwind for the research teams. But beneath the public fascination, the scientists were quietly venturing into a deeper stage of exploration, one where they could finally begin to trace the architecture of the dolphin's mental universe. Every new batch of translated data revealed fresh complexities. There were layers within layers, subtle changes in pitch that altered meaning like inflections in human speech, pauses whose placement shifted the emotional tone, and bursts of synchronized clicks that seemed to serve as punctuation or emphasis. When visualized on the research team's spectrogram displays, these messages formed intricate patterns, curves, clusters, and repeating shapes that looked more like the written script of an unknown culture than random sound waves. One of the earliest revelations was the dolphins' apparent use of conversation threads. Unlike the short call and response exchanges seen in many animal communications, dolphins maintained extended dialogues that could span hours, picking up themes, revisiting earlier topics, and weaving in new elements. For example, researchers documented a pod discussing hunting strategies in the morning, dispersing to feed, and then returning in the afternoon to exchange information about what had worked best. The continuity of these threads suggested memory tracking and topic management, functions previously assumed to be uniquely human. Even more intriguing was the discovery of what the AI linguists tentatively labeled cross-pod diplomacy. Field teams recorded interactions between pods that had historically maintained separate territories. In these meetings, the dolphins engaged in exchanges that, when decoded, appeared to revolve around resource sharing and boundary acknowledgement. Rather than escalating to conflict, the pods used what sounded like ceremonial exchanges, formulaic, repeated phrases layered with identifying whistles. This indicated not just communication, but an established system of social protocol, the equivalent of handshakes and treaties under the waves. The decoding also began to reveal a fascinating interplay between language and identity. Every dolphin was known to have its unique signature whistle, but now, scientists saw that these identifiers could be modified in subtle ways to convey status, emotion, or relationships. A mother addressing her calf would adjust her signature's tone and pacing, producing a softer, drawn-out version. Friends used truncated or playful variants, while unfamiliar dolphins tended to use the full, formal form. In essence, dolphins used name grammar to signal closeness or distance, weaving emotional context into the very sound of identity. One of the most captivating moments came when researchers isolated a long, complex sequence exchanged between two elder dolphins. At first, the AI struggled to parse it. It contained no immediate environmental context, no visible activity like hunting or travel. But as more context was added from similar sequences recorded in different pods, a picture emerged. The elders were telling a story. Not a simple description of the present, but a layered narrative about a storm from many seasons ago. The shifting of the seabed and the relocation of feeding grounds afterward. There were references to individuals long gone, and metaphoric phrases tied to ocean currents and light patterns. This hinted at a cultural memory, a communal archive encoded in language and shared through generations. The notion that dolphins might be storytellers caused a ripple of excitement through both the scientific and philosophical communities. Storytelling is more than entertainment. It is the fabric by which societies transmit values, knowledge, and identity. If dolphins shared legends or historical accounts, then their culture had a temporal depth far beyond what had been imagined. It meant that their world was not only lived but remembered, not only experienced but reflected upon. Alongside narrative content, researchers began to detect structures resembling humor, irony, and possibly even rhetorical flourish. In one notable recording, a young dolphin used the signature whistle of a known older dolphin while describing a failed fish chase. The pod responded with a series of rapid bursts that the AI tagged as laughter equivalents. It was a prank, good-natured teasing embedded in a formal message. This showed a capacity for perspective-taking, the ability to play with identity, and the willingness to engage in social games using language as the medium. As the decoding advanced, scientists became increasingly aware of the dolphin's ability to convey spatial and environmental data in astonishing detail. Some whistle sequences carried embedded sonar-like maps of the surrounding terrain, acoustic holograms that other dolphins could interpret instantly. In human terms, it was like giving someone both a verbal description of a location and a three-dimensional model at the same time. These spatial messages were often shared before long-distance travel or when younger pod members were being introduced to new regions. The AI found that these map whistles were astonishingly consistent across individuals, suggesting a standardized cartographic vocabulary within pods. This discovery opened the possibility that dolphins possess something akin to a shared oceanic atlas, passed down and updated over centuries. Such a system would allow pods to navigate immense distances with precision, sharing knowledge of safe passages, rich feeding zones, and dangerous areas long before they were encountered. This was intelligence adapted perfectly to a fluid, ever-changing environment. In parallel, the research team uncovered evidence of what could only be described as ocean-wide news networks. Some pods seem to act as information hubs, receiving and relaying updates across vast stretches of water. Messages about shifting currents, the appearance of predators, or the arrival of large schools of fish traveled hundreds of miles, changing subtly with each transmission, but preserving core content. These were not instinctive alarm calls, but fully formed messages containing who, what, where, and when. It was a marine version of journalism, sustained not by written text, but by living vocal memory. The decoding also revealed an extraordinary sensitivity to emotional nuance. Dolphins could express shades of feeling that the AI had to map onto a complex emotional wheel. Joy, anticipation, frustration, curiosity, and empathy all had their acoustic signatures. In one moving example, a calf that had been separated from its mother emitted a sequence of whistles carrying distress markers. Other pod members responded with layered calls combining reassurance tones and directional guidance, leading the calf back. This was not mere survival instinct. It was a socially conscious act wrapped in empathetic language. Perhaps the most staggering implication came from a sequence captured entirely by accident. While the research drones were stationed far offshore, They recorded a group of dolphins producing sounds unlike anything previously cataloged, elongated, haunting whistles with harmonic overtones. These were repeated in a pattern and then followed by ordinary conversational whistles. When translated, the AI suggested that the strange sequence was a kind of ritualized greeting used when encountering a pod not seen in many years. If accurate, this was the discovery of a ceremonial register, a formal, possibly sacred layer of dolphin language. As scientists pieced together these findings, they began to understand that dolphin communication was not a single flat system, but a stratified one. There were casual exchanges for day-to-day life, strategic dialogues for hunting and travel, artistic or ceremonial expressions for rare events, and possibly even philosophical discourse that humans had yet to fully grasp. The complexity was dizzying, and every answer spawned more questions. In the midst of this intellectual expansion, the practical challenges were immense. Translating a language that existed in three-dimensional sound space into human words was inherently reductive. Many dolphin concepts had no direct human equivalents. Certain whistle combinations carried meanings that merged emotion, physical sensation, and environmental awareness into a single unit. The AI team often debated whether to translate literally or to approximate using metaphor. For example, a term roughly meaning the shifting shadow where the warm water meets the cold might be rendered simply as thermocline, but this stripped away the poetic imagery embedded in the dolphin original. To address this, the researchers began developing a hybrid translation system, part literal, part interpretive, that would preserve as much of the original nuance as possible. This was not just a technical challenge, but a philosophical one. In translating the dolphins' language, they were also deciding how their culture would be presented to humanity. The responsibility weighed heavily, as any mistranslation could distort our perception of an entire civilization. As understanding deepened, scientists started identifying what they believed were idioms, phrases whose meaning could not be derived from their literal components. For instance, one repeated expression translated loosely as singing with the tide appeared to mean going along with circumstances or accepting what cannot be changed. Another, chasing the silver cloud, referred to pursuing an opportunity, often with an undertone of risk. Idioms revealed that dolphin language was not only functional, but metaphor-rich, reflecting abstract thought and creative expression. The study of regional dialects added another layer of complexity. Pods from different parts of the world use distinct patterns for common concepts, much like human languages. A Caribbean pod might have a unique whistle for shark, while an Australian pod used a different one altogether. In some cases, these differences extended to grammar and syntax, suggesting that dolphin culture had evolved in semi-isolated linguistic communities. This finding hinted at the possibility of translation within translation, where understanding a pod's dialect was a prerequisite for accurate communication. One of the most startling developments came from the analysis of overlapping speech. Dolphins often produced multiple vocalizations at the same time, creating harmonics that conveyed separate but related messages. Humans, constrained by linear speech patterns, could barely comprehend this multi-channel delivery. For dolphins, however, it seemed to be second nature, an adaptation to an environment where rapid, information-dense communication could mean the difference between life and death. The AI's success in parsing these overlapping layers was hailed as a major technical triumph, and it opened new vistas in understanding the sheer speed and efficiency of dolphin thought. The translation breakthroughs also raised tantalizing questions about how dolphins perceive time. In some messages, they appeared to reference events that would occur with future environmental changes, like seasonal fish migrations, suggesting a predictive awareness. In others, they spoke of events long past in the same tense as the present, blurring human distinctions between now and then. This fluidity hinted at a different temporal consciousness, one perhaps shaped by the cyclical rhythms of the ocean rather than the linear march of human calendars. Beyond the scientific implications, the emotional impact on those working with the dolphins was profound. Field researchers who had spent years recording what they assumed were simple signals now found themselves listening to layered conversations, recognizing greetings, jokes, and laments. Many described a deepening sense of connection, as if the dolphins were no longer just study subjects, but colleagues in an interspecies exchange. This shift in perception was not abstract. It changed the way researchers moved, spoke, and interacted in the dolphins' presence. fostering a mutual respect that transcended the old boundaries of observer and observed. Some of the most delicate work involved controlled experiments in message exchange. Using carefully constructed phrases, scientists began to initiate conversations, not commands, but inquiries and acknowledgments. The dolphins' responses were measured, sometimes mirroring the structure of the human-generated messages, sometimes playfully subverting them. One dolphin, upon being greeted with the equivalent of "good hunting today," replied with a teasing whistle that translated roughly as "not with you in the water," a remark that caused clear laughter-like responses from its companions. This showed that dolphins could not only understand human attempts at their language, but could incorporate those attempts into the fluid, playful dynamics of their own speech. All these discoveries painted a picture of a civilization that was at once alien and familiar. The dolphins' world was shaped by the pressures and possibilities of life in the ocean, yet their strategies for connection, cooperation, and meaning-making mirrored many of humanity's own. Their language was a living testament to the adaptability of intelligence, proof that the ability to share stories, solve problems collectively, and build social bonds was not the sole domain of humans. And still, the decoding had barely scratched the surface. For every insight, there were a dozen mysteries waiting. Cryptic ceremonial sequences, references to entities or phenomena not yet identified, subtle tonal shifts whose meaning was elusive. The sense among the scientists was that they had opened the first chapter of a vast and ancient book, and the rest of the volume stretched out in the deep, waiting for the right combination of patience, technology, and humility to be read. The next phase of research moved beyond decoding isolated exchanges into exploring how dolphins organize their intellectual and social worlds over entire lifetimes. What emerged was the recognition that language was only one component of a far broader cognitive framework, one that appeared to encompass education, philosophy, and a form of oceanic aesthetics that humans had never before imagined. The more researchers listened, the more they began to suspect that dolphin society was not simply about survival in a harsh environment. It was about cultivating a shared experience of existence. A major breakthrough came when researchers identified sequences that appeared to be structured teaching sessions. These were most often observed between older and younger dolphins outside of immediate foraging or defensive contexts, suggesting they were not simply instinctive cues, but deliberate instructional interactions. In one case, an adult guided a calf through a complex hunting maneuver, not by performing it physically, but by transmitting a detailed vocal description in real time. The calf would attempt the maneuver, fail, and then receive corrective sequences that altered specific whistle patterns. This back and forth, when analyzed, revealed the linguistic equivalent of "try again but turn left sooner," or "approach from below the school." The fact that these teaching sequences could be broken down into discrete conceptual units suggested an ability to isolate, manipulate, and transmit abstract instructions, a trait once thought to be uniquely human. Perhaps even more surprising was the discovery of sequences that didn't appear to serve any immediate purpose at all. They were neither hunting strategies nor warnings, nor social coordination calls. Instead, they were complex arrangements of tones, patterns, and harmonic overlays repeated over extended periods. These artistic constructs, as some scientists cautiously termed them, seemed to be performances, acoustic sculptures crafted in the fluid medium of the ocean. The dolphins would gather in loosely formed circles, emit these layered compositions, and then drift apart without engaging in any coordinated action afterward. No one could yet determine whether these were songs, sound paintings, or some other sensory art form entirely, but their structure and recurrence suggested intentional creation for the sake of shared experience. It was during one of these artistic exchanges that researchers documented what they believed to be an act of philosophical inquiry. A dolphin emitted a complex question sequence, identified as such because it ended with a known interrogative marker about an event that had occurred days before. Another responded not with a direct answer, but with a series of tonal contrasts that, when translated, seemed to reflect on the unpredictability of the ocean's behavior. It was, in human terms, an answer that acknowledged the limits of knowledge. The AI linguists debated fiercely over whether this constituted abstract thought, but the pattern repeated in multiple pods, questions met not always with concrete solutions but with musings on uncertainty itself. Even more compelling was the discovery of multi-generational knowledge strings. These were lengthy, carefully articulated narratives that only certain elder dolphins seemed able to deliver. They contained references to events, migrations, and even other species' behaviors going back decades, possibly centuries. Researchers mapped these strings and found that they were composed of smaller, repeatable units like stanzas in a poem that could be recombined depending on context. This modular design allowed the narrative to be both preserved and adapted, ensuring that crucial knowledge survived even when individuals were lost. It was an oral tradition with built-in resilience, showing an advanced understanding of how to safeguard collective memory. In parallel with these cultural and philosophical findings, scientists began to explore the sensory-motor component of dolphin communication. They discovered that certain messages were accompanied by deliberate shifts in swimming patterns, body orientation, and even the way dolphins surfaced for air. These movements were not random. They formed a kind of body punctuation that modified or emphasized the acoustic message. For example, a whistle sequence indicating danger to the west might be paired with a sudden pivot and tail slap, reinforcing urgency and direction. This multimodal communication hinted at a sensory integration far more advanced than previously documented. Language not just as sound, but as an embodied spatial performance. If you liked this video, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Also, leave your comments below and tell us, what are your thoughts on scientists decoding dolphin language? What do you expect happens next? We want to hear from you. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.